There's a school in Maine called the Center for Teaching and Learning, and it's a private school, and it's typical in the sense that they have all the regular subjects. They have science and math and art and languages, and they teach those subjects in the what you would say the conventional way. It's not Waldorf or Montessori. It's not anything like that. And so, what makes this school very interesting, though, is how they approach reading. The classrooms are full of books, and the founder writes in her book, her name is Nancy Atwell, and she writes in her book, The Reading Zone, that her goal is to have 20 books for every student. And so how they approach it is that she gives the students autonomy to choose whatever books they want to read them for as long as they want to read them, to quit them if they don't like them. They do letters to the teachers. They do book talks. The teachers do book talks. And what they found at this school is that when students are given the opportunity to choose the books that they want to read, when they're given the freedom to quit those books, when they're given a platform to talk about the books, both in writing and to talk in front of the class about the books, when they see other people talking about the books and they live in this culture, in this school culture of reading and talking about reading, that students wind up loving to read. And that the average student at her school reads between 30 and 40 books a year. Now, this is a private school, but they do a lot of fundraising, and they do a lot of, and Nancy Atwell goes out of her way to make sure that they have a proper representation of the demographics of rural Maine. So they have working class kids, and they have poor kids, and I'm sure they have some rich kids too. The school is reflective of their community, and so it's not much different in that sense from the public school. However, these kids are coming in and they're reading 30 or 40 books every year as 7th and 8th graders. And so I read this book, and I thought to myself, maybe I can try something like that. I don't know if I could do exactly what she's doing. She has a lot of books, and she also has these students all day long. I'm a high school teacher. I have my students for 42 minutes a day, and plus we have other things that we have a curriculum that we're supposed to follow. So, but I read it, and with with realistic optimism, I tried to adopt her program. We had standing homework every night of 30 minutes of reading. One day a week, I dedicated to either free reading or book talks. It was usually the free reading. So they would bring their books. I had a spreadsheet. I kept track of what books they were reading. And so I sort of did a little envelope math every week. If a kid, everyone reads at different speeds. However, if someone was on page 7 last Friday and they're on page 12 this Friday, then either the book is entirely too challenging for them, or they're not doing their 30 minutes of reading a day. So I was able to keep track of it in that way. Oh, the second rule was letter writing. So when they were finished with the book, they would write me a letter, and there's a template that I took right out of the Reading Zone. And then the last thing we did was book talks, and we tried to do this twice a quarter. This is a quote from Nancy Atwell's book. There is no more important homework than reading. Research shows that the highest achieving students are those who devote leisure time to reading, even when the school day and year are only mid-length and homework isn't excessive. One of the few predictors of high achievement in math and science is the amount of time children devote to pleasure reading. Atwell claims that the research shows that the more kids read, the more they know and the better they do on tests, not just in English, but in math and science. Now, one of the things that Atwell talks about in her book are the type of books that are allowed to be read. She doesn't just allow the classics, she also allows contemporary stuff and edgy stuff. And if you're in 5th grade, you can read a 3rd grade book, or if you're in 7th grade, you can read a 12th grade book. It's not, you're not limited in that way. She doesn't seem to think too highly of graphic novels or things like that. She would prefer literature. I've allowed my students to read graphic novels. I have English language learners. She doesn't. She actually even mentions that in her book, that she doesn't, and she would be interested to see how this program would work with them. I've allowed a bit more flexibility. Here's another quote from her book. Over 20 years of teaching reading in a workshop, my classes of 7th and 8th graders have had an average of at least 40 books each year. A child sitting in a quiet room with a good book isn't a flashy or a marketable teaching method. It just happens to be the only way anyone ever grew up to become a reader. And it's true. If teachers come in and they see other teachers, your peers come in and they see students, it could look like a study hall, like a bunch of kids just sitting around reading books. If a principal came in, it might look that way too. And if you have your book open and you're reading with them, then in my opinion, that helps to cultivate a culture of reading, but it could also look like you're taking a day off. And so, like she says, it's not flashy and it's not marketable. But how else do you really learn how to read except for to read? How else do you learn how to swim except for to swim? How else do you learn how to run except for to run? If the point is for students to read more and to be able to appreciate literature and to be able to get more meaning out of it and to be able to make connections between different books, why we're going to do lessons every day that are broken up in 5 or 10 minute activities, and think pair shares and presentations and the rest of it. And some of this stuff isn't bad, but if the goal is for them to read more, then they need to read more, and then you need dedicated class time for them to do that. If your goal for your students is to have them read more, and you think that's important for them, and I do, then you have to make that decision that you're going to dedicate at least some class time for them to be just reading. Our standardized tests for them are 6 hours long. Our students take standardized tests for 6 hours. And so if you think that a student is going to sit there and read for 10 minutes and then you're going to interrupt them with some activity and they're going to build up their stamina for these tests, it's not going to happen. If you want them to build their stamina for reading anything, then they're going to have to do it for more than 5 or 10 minutes. And so when kids are sitting around reading, you don't feel like you're teaching, and then you don't feel like you're needed, and then suddenly you feel like you're not doing your job, and you feel the need to interrupt them with some activity. If you look back at the beginning of the quote, she has her students read an average of 40 books each year. I don't see how you can argue with that. All right, here's a quote from a different book, and this book is called The Teenage Liberation Handbook by Grace Llewellyn. The best English teacher in the world would hardly say a word, especially to the whole class at once. She would stay out of your way, let you read all you wanted, and not try to organize any cute conversation about the motivations of the characters or the relationship between the setting and the theme. She would not keep you from writing by making you write. She would sit peacefully at her desk, reading Pride and Prejudice. If you went to her, she would put her book down, smile, and consider your questions. Unfortunately, if this teacher ever existed, she is surely fired by now, because every time the principal came in to check on her, she was not busy asking you the difference between metaphor and simile. I love that quote, and I actually love her book also. Grace Llewellyn's book is The Teenage Liberation Handbook. This might be a little bit extreme for what we're talking about, but I think it pairs nicely with the previous quote. And that is to say, we have to, if the goal is to have students read 30 books a year, 40 books a year, or even 10 books a year, we need to resist the urge, and I have the same urge sometimes, but we need to resist the urge of interrupting reading to teach something, because they need time to read. You only become a better reader by reading. The next quote is from Stephen King, and this is from his book on writing. This is a great book if you haven't read this one. The golden rule is that if you read more and you write more, then you become a better reader and a better writer. In the Q&A period which follows, someone invariably asks, "What do you read?" I've never given a very satisfactory answer to that question, because it causes a kind of circuit overload in my brain. The easy answer, everything I can get my hands on. He says when he's working, it's all the playground, and when he's done with a book and he takes some time off, it's difficult for him, and he has anxiety and he doesn't know what to do with himself. I think if we approach it from that standpoint, that this is a playful activity and this is a fun activity, and that you can read anything you want, and you can take and if you're interested in it, and if it's playful to you, then continue reading it, and if it's not, then don't. There's a student in the student testimony. You'll see it at the end. We'll do little video interviews, and she says, I like reading horror. I like reading horror books. And when she reads them, that's the attitude. You can just see her demeanor. That's her attitude. That it's playground. It's fun. Maybe that's another misconception or something that educators struggle with, is that if it's too much fun, that means it's not. It's like the medicine can't taste too good, or else it's not medicine. I don't agree with that. I think that you should be having fun as you're learning. I think it's the best way to learn. If you're in a state of mind where you're being forced to do something, or you're being, threatened or coerced, or you're being bribed, I think that's the attitude we have to have. Everything I can get my hands on. You go down to the library, and it's just, there's books everywhere, and you can take any one of them you want to take. When you tell students that this is the one book we're doing, it's so limiting that it limits them. And if that's what we've done from K till 12, then we've more or less limited them forever. We're letting them know that that the library is a kind of museum where you can go down there and sit at the tables and look at all the exhibits, look at all the books just sitting on the shelves. But they're not really to use; they're just more to look at. Because we say that this is the book we're reading, and that's it. This is the book. Stephen King says, I say it again, I read everything I can get my hands on. We have to have that kind of energy. We have to have that kind of attitude. Education is 85% attitude. This other quote is from How to Read Literature Like a Professor, by Thomas Foster. We're in the learning business. I am, and if you've read this far, so are you. Education is mostly about institutions and getting tickets stamped. Learning is what we do for ourselves. When we're lucky, they go together. If I had to choose, I'd take learning. We speak, as I've said before, of literary works, but in fact literature is chiefly play. If you read novels and plays and stories and poems and you're not having fun, somebody is doing something wrong. If a novel seems like an ordeal, quit. You're not getting paid to read it, are you? And you surely won't get fired if you don't read it, so enjoy. And this is from an article from the Washington Post. When children are encouraged to pick out their own books and spend time reading them, they are reminded that reading is something they enjoy doing, and that makes them more likely to spend time doing it outside of school. Now here's another reason why I think it's important to give students choice when it comes to reading. And this is also a reason why I think students think they're bad readers or think that they don't like reading. This is called reader's response theory. I didn't make this up. I don't know where it came from either. It's part of the curriculum, so I guess it's important. What it says is that readers make meaning out of text at the intersection of three things. It's the text itself. It's just the words on the page. It's the reader and their background and all the knowledge and experiences they bring into it. And then there's the purpose for reading. So whether you're reading it because someone told you to do it, or you picked it yourself, if you're reading the Bible because you're Christian, or if you're reading the Bible because you're studying theology, or if you're reading the classics because you want to impress your friends, or somebody suggested a book to you, whatever the purpose is, it's a third of where you get your meaning from. Who you are and the experiences and the knowledge you have, that's another third. And then the text itself, the words on the page, that's the other third. So when you tell someone they have to read something, or for that matter, when you give them a standardized test and they have a passage in front of you, that passage has been ripped from a larger piece with no context whatsoever. Any kind of connections that they do have with it is just going to be the luck of the draw. Just random things that maybe a student would have some kind of connection to. Maybe they wouldn't. If I told you have to do this thing, and you have to do it by, and you have 15 minutes to do it, ready, set, go, the purpose is completely, the whole environment, the whole energy behind it changes, the whole emotion behind it changes. And then the text itself, if I say that the whole class is reading book X, then it doesn't matter if they don't know 30 words on that page. It also doesn't matter if they know all the words, but they just don't care, because it's a dumb book from their perspective. If it's a dumb book from their perspective, they're never going to get into it. If it's not the play, like what Stephen King said before, if it's not the playground, then they're not going to get the meaning. And even if they do get it, they're definitely not going to retain it. That's really the issue. Every teacher knows that after the summer, kids forget everything. Well, that's not a normal thing to have happen. That's a school thing to have happen, and it happens because it's being forced on them, and so they do it because they don't want to get in trouble and they don't want to get a bad grade, and then they forget. There's the retention isn't there. They'll forget it. When you choose something and you know in your heart that you can quit it if you don't like it, and if you do like it, you keep going with it. That's something that's going to stay with you beyond just the quiz or the test. So this next piece was in Nancy Atwell's book, but it's by this guy Daniel Pennick, and it's called The Reader's Bill of Rights. And so if you look through these things, these are all rights that normal adult humans have. Nobody ever tells you that you have to read this thing or else. They never, if you start skipping pages, nobody's ever told you to stop skipping pages. You're not allowed to. You have a right to skip pages. You have a right to not finish. You don't lose your job if you don't finish a book. That's ridiculous. You have the right to reread something. We're not moving on to something else if you want to read this thing. You can read the same thing twice. It's fine. You have the right to read anything. They have the right to escapism. They have the right to read anywhere. They have the right to browse. You have the right to read out loud. Now, you have the right not to defend your tastes. What did this student a couple years ago? It was when the Twilight thing was big. The student says to me, "Yes, I like Twilight. No, I'm not going to explain myself to you." And that was before I read this. I thought that was the funniest thing I ever heard. You may laugh. These are the rights that we would give any adult. I don't know why we wouldn't give these same rights to a 16 or a 17 or even a 13-year-old. Why we think we have first of all, it's undignified. That's the first thing. I believe it's undignified to force books upon someone. It's like forcing love on someone. It's ridiculous. You can't do, like, I love to read. I think most people will love to read or can love to read. Like, I think it's natural in us to want to learn. We're a learning species. A lion, we're not faster or stronger than a lion. We can't fly. We can't stay underwater for too long, but we can use our brains and we can build things. And we can write things and we can draw things and we can read things, and that's how our species has survived. And so that's the other thing that teachers buy into, and it's this thing that they're not, if we don't make them do it, they won't do it. Well, that's ridiculous. We as humans have been doing this since humans were humans. Also, you can't make them learn anything. You can make them do activities until they pass something, at which point they'll forget. That's not really learning at all. And so we start forcing our love for reading on people. It's an unnatural thing, and it's not going to fit. It's not going to work, and it's going to teach them that they don't love reading, or they don't like reading, and it's going to teach them that they're bad. They're going to feel like they're bad readers. If you go back to the reader's response theory, if their purpose for reading is because someone told them to, and they don't have any background with the book, and you can say, well, you're supposed to teach them background. Okay, maybe. But like, you telling them what the background is isn't the same thing as them having the experience. I've had students who are refugees in Burma who read Goodbye Vietnam, and they were able to connect. I could stand there and tell you about about the child in Vietnam and how that's similar to the experience of a Karen kid in Burma. But that's not the same thing as having that experience and connecting with that book. As I gave this PD to colleagues, and I talked about it also with friends, and some questions came up. So I did a real quick frequently asked questions page. So one of the questions that came up was, how will you know if the books are rigorous enough or if they fall within the student's Lexile range? Well, there's a couple answers to that. The first thing is, when you go to the library, is the first thing you ask the librarian, where's my Lexile range? I think that's just a silly question, honestly. And I know we have a professional responsibility to find Lexile ranges and pair it with kids so that they're challenging themselves enough. But I don't see how that really helps. They're going to learn vocabulary and they're going to learn how to read. Now, if we're talking about a kid that can't, or we're talking about a kid that's a brand new immigrant and they don't know the alphabet, I'm not talking about those kids. That's a whole different thing, and so that's not what this is about. But if we're talking about someone who can read, even if they're 18 and they can read a middle school book, what you're going to see is that most kids are going to gravitate to where they're comfortable. Some kids are going to try to take on text that's just way too challenging, and you're going to get a few that are going to take things that are that aren't challenging enough. But typically, they're gonna gravitate towards those. Uh, you still have a role in this. You still have a big piece to play. We'll get to that in the last question. But the role that you play is that you're going to be an influence on what they select. And when I say they pick wherever they want, I mean they can pick wherever they want, but a lot of them don't even know where to start. And those who do know where to start, and some of them bite off one they can chew, and some of them are just trying to do the easy thing. You, as the person that reads all the time, and you've heard, you pay attention to the other students and you see which books they like, you sort of guide them towards books that you think are more appropriate to them. I'm not saying that you're choosing it for them, because that defeats the whole purpose of what we're doing here. But you are, especially pay attention to the ones, because a lot of times the ones who choose the books that are way too easy, they're the ones who just really don't know what to choose. And so they don't want to feel dumb and pick up a book that they can't read. Um, so that's how I feel about that. And the other question I get is, how will you, the teacher, be able to read all those books? Well, you're not going to be able to read all those books, and it's just not going to happen. So, and you don't need to, because we're not necessarily the point. What's the goal? What's the point here? The point is to get kids to read more and to love reading and to read outside of school, and to get to that. If if a few years from now I'm having students read 30 or 40 books a year, then I'm just going to retire because I feel like my job's done. That's the goal. And so if that's the goal, and you have even 10 kids in your class, and you want them all to read 30 books each, just 300 books, it's not going to happen. So you're going to have to let go. If that's something, you're going to have to let go a little bit. What if they quit all the time and never finish anything? So I've had administrators and teachers have a real issue when I say that students are allowed to quit reading books. They're going to quit because they don't like it, or because it's too hard for them, or for some reason like that. They are to read 30 minutes every day, so they have to pick a book. Again, your job here is to guide them. If they're reading a chapter, quit, a chapter, quit, a chapter, quit, then you have to guide them to a book that you think that maybe they would finish. But that's the way that they discover what they like and what they don't like. There's really no. You have to give them the freedom. If you don't give them the freedom, then we're back to square one, and that is you're force feeding these things. I don't want a bunch of quitters, but you're not a quitter if you quit something. You're just readjusting your strategy. I'm not saying stop reading altogether or drop out of school. I'm saying that you're dropping back 10 and punting. You're looking for something else. You're gonna do something else. Um, there's no sense in beating a dead horse. If you're doing 30 minutes a day, and you can only get through 5 or 6 pages before you fall asleep, then that's the wrong book for you. And so you have to have that, and also it's an emotional piece too. They have to, it's a trust piece. They have to know that you trust them enough that if they quit on a book, that they're going to take a different book. Uh, Another question I get is, and these are related, is what about the canon, or what about cultural capital, or what about reading all the important books, like the ones on the curriculum? Well, there's lots of important books, and so there is such a thing as literary merit, and I'm not going to argue with that. There are some books that have more value than others, as far as um, something you're going to find on a college curriculum, or something that a professor is going to recommend. Something that has literary value. That's true, but there's 1,000 of them. There's thousands of them. And if you got 4 English professors in a room, and you ask them all to write down their top 10 or top 20, they're not going to. I'm sure there'll be some that are the same, but they're not going to all be the same. And as far as cultural capital goes, I mean, this stuff's important. I don't want to say it's not. If you're going to study Western literature, then there's certain books that you ought to read. Just like if you're going to study Eastern literature, it's the same thing. If you're going to study a time period, there are certain books that you definitely should read. And if you want to be an expert in YA, then you have to read some YA books and whatever. But there's just so many out there. Then who's to say that you're better at picking them than they are? And so, you know, should everyone read Shakespeare? That's like Shakespeare probably they'd stop printing Shakespeare books if we stopped requiring them in high school and colleges. These things are being selected by people other than the ones who are reading them, and to me that's not a good way to foster a love for reading. Now you can guide them towards those books, you can suggest those books to them, and you can help you could help them through a couple chapters or an act or something. But what about the canon and cultural capital? Well, which canon and which culture, and who gets to decide which books are for who? I would rather, you know, I would rather they develop a love for reading and pick the books that they want to read than for me to have to force them to read books of slightly greater literary value. And then the last question is, what if they don't know which book to pick? Well, they don't. That's actually a really good question. That's something that I face all the time. Lots of them don't know which book to pick. Some of them do, and lots of them don't. And so it's important for you to be well read. It's important for you to also pay attention to what other students like. Also, the book talks that we do. The book talks are huge because when students do book talks, they're able to talk about what they loved about the book or what they didn't like about the book. And a lot of times other students will then raise their hand and they'll want to take that book next. And so those are the questions I got. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments section. I'm going to play the testimonials from the students, and then the video is going to end. So thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, then God bless you. And I hope this was helpful. Thanks.
If you're being told what to read, you ain't gonna like it, no matter like how great it is. You're always gonna find something that is not valid for you.
I feel excited
Why were you excited?
because I can't wait to read that book.
Right? Like choosing what to read, choosing is like yourself, right? You're
Right,
choosing
yeah.
by yourself, right?
That's right.
So you feel like you wanna read, you wanna get some education. That's why you choose by yourself. When you be told, it means you're lazy and someone told you to read. And when you read those books, you don't feel you don't have heart set on those books, so you're reading nothing. And then sometimes it's good too, cause the teacher told you to read a good book, so when you read it, kind of good.
Feel good
How come?
because I get to read the book that I want, and I know what the teachers want me to do it to make me read.
My first book was The Lovely Bone. It was hard for me because I chose. I never asked anyone, and but it was so interesting and I like it.
Students may read a lot of books if they pick what they want and enjoy reading it.
Because like when somebody told you to read, like you don't have the opportunity to read, like you don't have like the feeling to read, and when you're free to read, like you can choose any book that you want. Like if you didn't like the book, you can choose other book. But like if somebody told you to read the book, like if you didn't like it, you gotta read it because like the person making you to read it.
I feel good about picking any book. Even I do well on the English class, I still want to pick any book. Like, it doesn't matter how big the book was. Yeah, I still enjoy to read it.
Being told is not good because, like, for example, I love to read scary books and stuff. But if you told me to read romance and stuff, it makes me mad because I don't like those. And I think choosing whatever I want is good. make me happy.
But if I told you you had to read a book, how does it make you feel?
Mad.
I feel important since I can choose whatever I want to. I got my own opinion of the book. Like, I like it. It's my book. You heard?
Because when you choose your own book, it's because you really like the book. Because you got like different kind of book to choose. But if you read like just the beginning, you like it, you're gonna like the whole book. But if someone like told you what to read, maybe something like you don't like, and you only have to read, it's not gonna be fun for you. That's my opinion.
No, I didn't do anything.
None?
Zero.
No books.
Last year, like 2 or 1.
Wait, did
Last
you?
year, like, 1.
About 3.
Last year I read like 1 Havana. That's it.
Like 7 to 8.
5 to 6.
4.
About 6.
Read like five books. That's
This year I read around 5 book or 6 book.
I had read more than 5 books this year.
Don't lie.
Be honest, man.
Be honest. 3.
3 books.
Like around 20 and 30, I think. I read a lot of books.
What you read? What you did?
I'll take your paper.